is Law Weekly on Channels Television, showing today reactions to the suspension of the governor of the central bank as lawyers remain divided over the correct interpretation of Section 11, subsection 2F of the Central Bank Act. We bring you the views of two senior lawyers on that issue and the issues surrounding it.
Looking at the law stricto sensu, it does appear that the president is clothed with power to remove, and if the president is clothed with power to remove, the president can suspend.
If the intention was that the person who has the power to hire should fire, just like you have in the case of ministers, there wouldn't have been any need for recourse to the Senate.
Plus the update of the meeting of the Egbe-Amofin, the Southwest Lawyers Forum. That's the lineup. I am Shola Sheyeli. Details in a bit. One of the big news of last week was the suspension of the governor of the central bank, Mr. Lamido Sanusi. Now, whether President Goodluck Jonathan has powers to act the way that he did is still puzzling to many Nigerians. Indeed, there are even sharp divisions among lawyers over the correct interpretation of the powers of the president to suspend the CBN governor. On Law Weekly today, we will serve you the views of two very respected lawyers, Mr. Fidelis Oditah and Mr. Kemi Balogun.
If we talk about the legality, we'll be talking about whether the president do have the right to remove or to suspend. It is my view that the president is clothed with power to remove. If you look at the CBN Act, Section 11, subsection 2F, it provides that the president can remove. However, the remover is subject to third majority of the approval of the Senate. So the issue as to whether the president do have the power to remove is not, I don't think we should debate that. What people have said is whether the president can suspend, that the Act do say, do recognize, the Act recognizes the fact that the president can remove. And my view is, if the president can if the president can remove, it actually means that the president can suspend, because embedded in the power to remove is the power to suspend. I mean, it's like saying that the landlord can evict you, but he doesn't have a right to come into your house. Of course, we know that the landlord can come into your house to view state of repairs and all that, and if he's not satisfied, he can evict you, but he has to evict you in accordance with law, with procedure. Yes, so it's my view that the president can remove, and it is what happens thereafter. Where we run a democracy, where even the best action of the president or the best action of any of the arms of government can be challenged in court. And if a challenge comes, it's for the court to interpret and to determine. But looking at the law stricto sensu, it recognizes the fact that there must be a removal first. And then you now take that removal to the National Assembly or to the Senate, as it were. Otherwise, any other interpretation would be standing logic on its head. For example, I've had people say, you have to get approval of the third majority of the Senate first. And I'm like, okay, if every executive powers of Mr. President has to be debated first, and then the National Assembly or the Senate then approves, then it means that the Senate has no mind of his own. I mean, the President will have no mind of his own. What the President will then do is, okay, we'll wait when the big boys in the National Assembly or in the Senate. I don't think that is logical. It's saying the chicken, the egg, which comes first. There was a chicken that laid the egg. You don't say Mr. President has to first go and get approval. Every executive functions must be exercised. And in many cases, not only in Nigeria, in many democracies, it has been exercised, and then the approval comes.
Most people know that for several years, perhaps 7 or 8 years, NNPC has not been audited. Very many presidents in this country in the past have been reluctant or unwilling to have NNPC's books audited. And you have to ask yourself why. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to speculate as to why that might be. So this instance is the first time that you have a high-ranking officer, the governor of the central bank, saying that there are monies, very substantial sums of monies, which are unaccounted for. And these are very serious allegations. And you don't respond to such allegations by suspending the whistleblower. But unfortunately, this is just a pattern which has played out repeatedly in this country. When Ayo Salami, a few years ago, said he was being asked to reconstitute the panel, the election tribunal panel in Sokoto, and he refused, he was suspended. Instead of investigating whether the allegation is true, they punished the whistleblower. And his suspension lasted until he retired. Because although he went to court, because the court processes are extremely slow, everyone knew that he was never going to get any justice from the court. So also in the case of Bashir Gwandu, when in 2012 he alleged that the auction of the broadband spectrum had been riddled with fraud and that the country had been deprived of about 52 billion naira, the response from the presidency was to terminate his appointment. It was only on the 21st of January this year that the National Industrial Court ruled that his termination was unlawful. So the Sanusi suspension is just a theme on the same, a variation, I beg your pardon, on the same theme of lack of accountability. And when you get people who raise their heads and say, look, something is going wrong, instead of applauding them, they make them scapegoats and punish them. I think that section 11(2)(f) of the Central Bank of Nigeria Act is part of the structure put in place to ensure the autonomy and independence of the central bank. I do not understand how that institution can be independent and autonomous if the procedures set out in that act for the removal of its chief executive are not followed. And with respect to those who have taken refuge in the Interpretation Act, and it is entirely laughable because I saw the President's media spokesperson, Dr. Ruben Abati, citing Section 11 of the Interpretation Act. First of all, I didn't know that he's a qualified lawyer to interpret the Interpretation Act. But assuming that he has received some legal advice as to what that section could conceivably mean, I do not see how one can take refuge in that section. Section 1 of the Interpretation Act says, in the absence of any contrary expression in the relevant legislation, these are the provisions which govern the interpretation. And when you have a procedure in Section 11(2)(f) of the Central Bank Act, which says you have to go to the Senate and get 2/3 majority, I don't know how any moderately competent lawyer could not see that as a contrary intention. If the intention was that the person who has the power to hire should fire, just like you have in the case of ministers, there wouldn't have been any need for recourse to the Senate. And I do not see how you could say there is an inherent power to suspend. On the contrary, as a matter of common law, there is no inherent power to suspend an employee or anyone. You must seek an express power to do so. And in this case, there is no express power. I do not believe that Section 11 of the Interpretation Act can supplement what they think is an omission. But again, it's just another example of lawlessness, because whoever advised the president that this is permissible must have contemplated that in the ordinary course of events, what's likely to happen is that Mr. Sanusi will go to court. Before they file their preliminary objections, his tenure would have expired and the whole thing will become academic. But I think Mr. Sanusi stole some of their thunder by saying he does not want to come back anyway. So he's just going to take his time, go to court to get this issue interpreted for the benefit of posterity, which is entirely exemplary. But having said that, I mean, for all the troubles that he went through, I would have expected him to have resigned a long time ago. If I were in his position, saying to the government that these monies are missing and are being ignored, I would feel that my position was untenable and I would resign. I won't wait to be pushed.